So Spike Lee's latest film, The Five Bloods, just came out on Netflix today, and I'm going to give a little review. It is something related to politics. I'm not going to put it on my main channel. I'm going to stick it on my second channel. I have some notes here. I watched it today while I was working, so admittedly, not the best way to do it, but I have some thoughts. Now, a bit about me and my background. Basically, I've done a history degree, and most of my third year was focused on Vietnam, and I actually wrote my dissertation on Vietnam. It's fair to say I know a lot about Vietnam, and I'm going to talk about my main problem with Spike Lee films in general, just on that basis. But basically, the premise is 4 soldiers who are African Americans go back to Vietnam to find the remains of their commander, who they really respect, influence a lot of their views on life, with the dual purpose of actually going to find some gold they were transporting on a mission where he died. Now, to start with, the premise is pretty cool, and they go to Vietnam, and it's nice to see a film that shows Vietnam in a modern way, and show Vietnam how it is today, and it's, compared to what it was, it's a lot better after the war, and it's not doing so bad for itself despite, American propaganda in the 1960s. Now, as the plot goes, it's it has some twists and turns. I'm going to spoil some of it. So basically, the premise sort of turns on its head when they actually go out into the jungle to look for these remains. Actually gets a lot more violent. People die, which I liked, and it ramped up the action. And that's what I enjoyed the film the most, is these action set pieces in the jungle, which is not what I should be enjoying a Spike Lee film for. So to get the good things out the way, there are a couple scenes I liked. So in one of the flashback scenes, you had them ambushing some Vietnamese. I think it was Viet Cong. It could have been North Vietnamese. And they're talking about, one of them is talking about a poem his wife sent them. And they're going to read it out before being gunned down by the 5 African-American soldiers. And I really like that because it just humanises the Vietnamese in a way they're not humanised normally. So I appreciated something like that because it's just not what you see in general Vietnam movies. I also liked seeing the Hanoi sort of propaganda scene. It's quite notorious. They had women who would go on the speaker and broadcast themselves, and they would speak English to try and get in the heads of the American soldiers. And a lot of the time they targeted African Americans, being like, why are you fighting us when back home you're not even treated properly? And it has a scene where she announces the death of Martin Luther King and talks about, you should be back home fighting your own oppression. You shouldn't be out here killing us. And I like that scene. And it's not something unique, it is in pop culture and everything. But yeah, I like that. Okay, now for what I don't like. I've come to realise with this movie, I don't like Spike Lee films. And why I don't like them is because the script is bad. Also, the dialogue is pretty cringeworthy and unnatural. Because what Spike Lee does is use his characters and use his scenes to educate the audience. Now, that is generally a good thing. If you don't know much about Vietnam, if you don't know much about American history or what's going on at the moment, this film may be very educational. But the way the people talk about stuff is just irritating because it doesn't treat the audience with any respect. It is just talking at you about these problems. Whether, in these conversations that these men are having, they will bring up really weird stuff and then go on a tangent about them. So they'll talk about black soldiers in Vietnam, start talking about how they were, disproportionately represented, they were killed a lot, everything like that, which is fine. Totally fine to bring that up. But again, I don't need someone explaining that to me in a film. And this is not just because I have a background in the Vietnam War, in its history. It's just exposition, but framed as a conversation. But I can see through that and see what it's trying to do, and it's just lazy in my opinion, and it's too focused on telling the audience the message rather than showing us it. So that is a big point, and I think BlackKklansman does the exact same thing. It talks at the audience through these conversations, and I think even though it's a better form of exposition than you see in other films, I still don't like it, and again, I feel it doesn't treat the audience with respect. It doesn't respect your intelligence, and I think Spike Lee does that a lot, which is a problem with his films. Also, I didn't really care about the characters, and I didn't really care about the drama. Honestly, because of things like the overuse of exposition and explaining things to the audience, I don't feel like these people are characters. So I don't care. I don't care when they die. I don't care about the dynamics between them. So that's another problem. In that sort of context, there's a French woman in the film, and she talks about, the French's role in Vietnam, talks about what her family did because they made money with rubber plantations in Vietnam. Again, this character exists to tell me what the French did in Vietnam. That's a poor choice of writing because she's one of the main characters later on. So why is she just being used to tell me about one historical issue and tell me it like I don't have a clue about the subject matter? Again, you can look at this in a different way in the sense that you were saying Spike Lee is trying to educate people, which is fine. But as someone who loves films and loves the history of this stuff, it's lazy and it ruins the film experience for me. Other things, like they talk about how Uncle Ho Chi Minh, one of the Vietnamese characters, says, is like your George Washington. And then someone says, yeah, but George Washington owned slaves. And again, he talks about it for like maybe 20 seconds, but it doesn't feel like a natural reaction to someone saying this. I get it. There's now a discussion about the founding fathers in America owning slaves and if they were good people. And that's fair enough. And it's fair enough for Spike Lee to bring up. It just seems so unnatural. And again, takes me out of the film, feels like I'm being spoken at, rather than these characters having a natural conversation. And this happens throughout the film. I think the first 20 minutes in particular are very guilty of this. One thing I didn't mention is the French woman works for a group that disarm landmines. So when they're out in the jungle looking for this gold and the remains, you have that in your head. And I thought they actually weren't going to do anything with it, and it becomes a central point to the plot, which I appreciated, and I liked that. So in terms of technicalities and stuff, the effects and CGI in this film were really, really bad, and the battle scenes were really unrealistic. And the thing is, unlike some of his other films, these weren't really meant to be stylized. So you see a flashback scene where they're fighting the Viet Cong in the jungle. First of all, American soldiers did not all stand in a line and put their M16s on full auto and just keep firing. Again, what that just takes me out of the film because it seems so unrealistic. You watch something like Platoon, where it's like M16, you're shooting one at a time. Maybe you'll put on full auto in an emergency. Not all standing in a line like you're in some old gangster movie, just holding down the trigger again and again and again. And also, I don't know if they use real guns or even guns that fire blanks, because the effects on the fire coming out of the barrel were so poor, and it just really, again, it felt low budget. And the battle scene was just very unrealistic and pretty ridiculous. Two sides of the Viet Cong or the NVA versus the Americans shooting for each other. Again, it was pretty ridiculous and ruined it. Also, I don't know if people would like this, but the four actors who play these veterans are about 50, 60 years old. They also play the younger versions and they look the same age. I don't know if it's meant to be them remembering it, so they are their old selves, but they do a really poor job of de-aging these people. I would have actually rather they used younger actors as stand-ins. I don't know how that wouldn't have worked. Do you really need these old men, 50 and 60-year-old men, to pretend they're 20-year-olds? Again, some other stuff had to really take me out of the movie. But overall, I think the best parts were just like the starting montage and the ending montage. But again, like in BlackKklansman, I think there's just no respect, and I feel Spike Lee has this need to lecture people, and I'm totally, in a way, I understand why. He's a black filmmaker talking about black issues which are underrepresented in media and American media, especially American history. You just sometimes feel that you've got to educate people on these. You've got to put forward these expositions of these characters to let people know the information. But let's take a different take on it. Let's think of the HBO's Watchmen. How much did that get people talking by just showing us the Tulsa Massacre in 1921, and then people went and researched, be like, oh my God, is this real? Again, showing something that people didn't really know about and bringing it into the national consciousness, bringing it into the debate, and it didn't start saying, loads of stuff to you directly as the audience about the Tulsa Massacre. It showed you it, and then throughout the show had a sort of, theme about how it hasn't exactly changed about 100 years later. That is so much more effective than having characters you don't care about spout exposition with the goal of telling the audience things they don't know. Again, it ruined the movie for me, and I don't actually, the movies I've seen for Spike Lee, I don't consider them movies, because the characters are weak, the story is weak, the dialogue is bad, and it's not that entertaining, and in this case the CGI is bad, but what it does do is it's an interesting take on the subject matter and maybe raises some interesting questions in your head, especially if you're not familiar with this subject matter. But if you are, it's not telling you anything you don't know. It's not being very insightful. It doesn't go nearly deep enough if you do know this stuff to make you challenge your own beliefs or think deeper about it. It's just like, this is interesting, telling me about 4 black veterans, how the war affected them, and, you know, what it was like going back through this kind of weird story. And yeah, I think you can get something out of this movie just like BlackKklansman. I just really, really don't understand the hype as a film, you know, in the art form of a film. And it goes to show, I think, how unentertaining this film is that Ken Burns' documentary on the Vietnam War on Netflix is actually more entertaining. Like, it's a better watch despite it being a documentary. And it's 100 times better at conveying the information. So 100%, I recommend that. This is a bad Vietnam War movie. Raises some important issues, gives some visibility to, you know, an underrepresented group in terms of African Americans in cinema, but an even more underrepresented group in terms of African American veterans and African American veterans from the Vietnam War. But again, I feel it's very lazy. I feel it's just telling the audience too much information, and it doesn't show. Show me, don't tell me. That's what I want. I'm not an idiot. A lot of your audience are not going to be idiots. You don't have to appeal to the lowest common denominator. But again, I respect what Spike Lee is trying to do with these films in educating people. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please leave a like. Again, this is my second channel. My main one is The Cavanacle. It's trying to hit 10k subs on that, so please go check that out. Follow me on social media at The Cavanacle on most social medias. Main one is Twitter. Check out my Reddit, which is r/TheCavanacle. Check out my other channel for everything else. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.